Hi, my name is Tony Miller. I want to tell you about something that was one of the most remarkable answers to prayer that I personally have ever been able to be a part of. I had the privilege of growing up in a Christian home, but one of the things I recognize is that even though I was raised in a Christian home, I didn't inherit my faith, I had to choose it. And one of the things I learned by learning to choose my faith is that oftentimes the testimony of God's faithfulness in my family became a witness to me personally. When I was just a small child, my father owned a lumber business, a logging operation here in America. And on a cold winter morning, trying to get a logging truck started, it wouldn't start because it was so cold. Back in those days, they would oftentimes take the carburetor, the breather off the top of the carburetor and pour a little bit of gas in it to try to just get it jump start. So my dad that morning opened the hood of the truck and began to pour a little bit of gasoline in, but he was holding the gasoline in his hand and he hollered for his brother to come to him. And his brother was in the truck and he thought he had give signal for him to hit the starter. So he hit the starter, and when he did, the engine on that truck blew up, literally backfired. A ball of fire came up out of the carburetor and it ignited the can of gas in my dad's hands and it blew up all over my father. As a result, my dad fell off the truck, obviously in a flame of fire. My uncle got out of the truck and began to try to pat him down to stop the fire because it was cold, it was winter, he had on leather gloves, and everywhere he would hit my dad, skin would just pull off of his body. We lived just outside of Washington, D.C. at that time, and so they took my dad, rushed him to the hospital. And when my father got to the hospital, skin was hanging off of his face, his ears were gone. It was just even a miracle if he was going to be alive or not. He had severe burns over all the upper half of his body. And as he was taken into the emergency room, doctors began to come and prepare my mother for what they thought was the worst. And one doctor said to my mother, Mrs. Miller, you need to prepare yourself because your husband is going to, if we can save his life, he's going to be like a monster the rest of his life. There's not enough skin grafts that can be done. There's nothing we can do. You need to prepare yourself for the worst. They wrapped my dad up really like a mummy. They left 2 eyes open and a place for his mouth. In those days, they didn't treat burns the same they do today. And they left, and my mother went over to speak to my dad. And my dad had just been born again and actually became a spirit-empowered believer. And my dad, through the little opening left for his mouth, said to my mother, call for the elders of the church and ask them to come anoint me with oil and pray. Because the prayers of righteous people avail much. My mother called for our pastor, who was not famous nor well known, but he came with a couple elders from our church and they anointed my dad. They left a little oil spot right there on the bandages on his head, and they prayed the prayer of faith. They left and went home. My dad told my mother the next day, he said, when they prayed last night, the burning sensation left me. You know how much a burn can sting and continue to burn long after the flames are out. He said, the burn left me. It's no longer a part of my life. Make a long story short, 3 days later, when they came in to remove his bandages, as they untook bandages from my dad's face and upper body, all the dead burnt skin from that disaster and that horrible fire was in those bandages. And underneath those bandages, my dad had a brand new face. He had new ears. Everything was perfectly formed. His upper body was completely with new skin. 10 days later, my dad left that hospital because he had begun to shave. My dad died at almost 80, and even in his old age, my dad had skin that was much like a baby's skin. It was a miracle. I'll never forget that because it marked our family that the God of heaven answers prayer. Now, I want to challenge you today. It does not matter how difficult or tragic the circumstance of your life. The Bible says, whoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved. I want to encourage you today to believe that prayer not only helps you, but that it really does cause heaven to respond to your needs. Miracles are possible through people who pray.